Okay, thank you, David. And only because you mentioned the book and we're on LinkedIn streaming as well, I thought I'd show it, right? It was not my intention, but in case you're interested, it's called Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders and How to Fix It. And actually, I'm not really going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about the future of work, whether people analytics and data science can be a force for good, and most of the things that I think brought us here these 2 days to sunny Philadelphia. So throughout our relatively short history, if you think about it, we've been around for, 200,000 years or so, so it's a relatively, small period of time, and like 4 or 5 billion of years that the world existed. I think work has always been a very central or pivotal part of human life. In the beginning, life was simpler, of course. We worked to eat and survive, which mostly meant not being eaten. There were no chief people analytics officers, no chief happiness officers, no prioritization ninjas, you name it, right? So, but very quickly, the nature and meaning of work evolved to promote other things. So in a way, work became an excuse to foster social cooperation, competition, and fueling much of human evolution and progress. In fact, we are here today because of what our ancestors have done for us. So thank you. Now is the time to be grateful, right? So we wouldn't have cities, we wouldn't have a complex world of organizations that justifies HR, let alone people analytics. And this is, I think, why we need to think a little bit deeper or harder about the issues that organizations or people face today. This is why we need a science or a method for dealing with this complexity. So whenever we talk about the future of work, and there's so many discussions in popular or business forums about this subject, I'm often a little bit cynical or skeptical, because I think, if you obsess too much about the future, that's often an excuse for not dealing with the present problems. And I certainly think that if you want to make any predictions, sensible predictions about the future, you need to start understanding the past or drawing lessons from the past. So I think the fundamental or universal elements of work are unlikely to go away or change anytime soon. But in the last 100 years, we have seen clear changes and a lot of transformation, maybe faster and quicker changes than usual. And I think it's important to pay attention to these. Just 100 years ago or so, when the field of HR was actually invented with scientific management and tailorization and Fordism and assembly lines, work was a very different phenomenon. It was certainly not meant to be fun, right? Can you imagine the average worker returning from an assembly line factory and telling their husband, wife, partner, I didn't have fun at the office today, or today I didn't experience a higher sense of purpose, a sense of calling. They would have been labeled as crazy. It was certainly an anomaly, not the norm. In those early beginnings of HR, which were called scientific management, very interesting. There are a lot of parallels with the world of people analytics today, because psychologists saw organizations as an ecosystem where they could experiment. So the organization was sort of like an HR lab or an applied psychological lab. And it wasn't just about data. It was really about science. There were theories that were being shaped and applied to interpret and understand the data and turn those insights into better techniques for managing people, and particularly for dealing with the interaction between people and machines. A lot of parallels where we are today. In fact, a lot of what we're seeing today in the space of people analytics are footnotes to Friedrich Taylor and scientific management. So fast forward 100 years to present time, and today we're living in a world where most people don't just want jobs, they want careers, they want meaningful careers. Organizations know that to compete for top talent, they need to offer employees consumer-like experiences. And at the same time, simultaneously, even for the people who are educated enough to be part of that hyper-meritocracy or elite of knowledge workers, life is not simple. Expectations increase more than actual experiences, and they're working as many hours or more hours than before to achieve the same output. Here's an interesting and often forgotten statistic about the future of work. In 1930, the Nobel Prize-winning economist Maynard Keynes predicted that by the year 2000, technology would have advanced so much that humans would only work 15 hours a week. Not the case, right? Maybe for some of you, congratulations if that's you, but it hasn't happened. At the same time, today we have fears of those who believe in the dystopian impact that AI or machine learning might have, that it will lead to a class of idle workers or a useless class of people who can't be employed. Maybe that's not a bad thing if you have income that guarantees that you can be at home watching Netflix or doing whatever you want or travel to your favorite place. That's not a bad thing, but I think it's safe to assume that in the next 10 or 20 years, that's unlikely to happen. What we know with almost certainty is that we are entering an age where not just data, but also AI is going to be a key marker in the experience of work in the world of organizations or how organizations are structured or managed. So if we had Taylorization in scientific management 100 years ago, and then the sort of what I would call the age of the spiritual workaholic, people who experience an almost psychotic-like level of identification with their jobs. They are no longer nationalists, they don't identify with political groups, etc., but the career is their passion. Right? And that's why we expect them to be so engaged that we don't even have to motivate them or pay them much. They're going to work 120% nonstop and love it, and we're going to track everything they do, right? So this is the present. What does work look like in 100 years' time? Or at least in these 100 years that we have ahead. And of course, nobody knows, right? The only thing certain about the future is no one has data on the future, so we can speculate. And I think there are three main points that seem like a reasonable prediction or speculation to make. The first is, at least where we are today, I think, and this will be the case for the next 5 or 10 years, we'll continue to see a stage in this process where humans working with AI will produce better outcomes than humans without AI or AI without humans. Sometimes it's interesting because you can already see instances where adding human judgment to AI decreases the effectiveness or accuracy, for example, of diagnosis. And for sure, we have seen cases where AI without human expertise or judgment makes things worse. The second trend which we're seeing today is that even though artificial intelligence and technology eliminates a lot of jobs, more jobs are being created than those that are eliminated, right? So for every job that is eliminated, maybe 2 or 3 new jobs are created, which is why in the rich world we're seeing an unprecedented era of continuous job growth and low unemployment in most cases. So for example, in the US today, you have something like 6 million job seekers for 7.2 million job openings. And the third and not so good point or prediction is that although technology creates more jobs than it takes away, the skills that are needed to do those new jobs are at least different and in many instances higher or more sophisticated or more advanced than the skills that were needed to do the jobs that are being eliminated, right? So this is why reskilling and upskilling is so important. And so those are things I think are safe predictions to make for the next 10 or 20 years. Although I shouldn't really, because if you make predictions for 100 years' time, nobody will be alive to test, so it's a lot, you're in safer ground. I'm being a little bit risque here. Remind me in 10 years if I got it wrong. And then I think there are 3 main implications for what we do or what we generally want to know. First, implications of these potential trends actually being realized, implications for how we manage talent, for talent management or HR. I think clearly, even today, gone are the days where organizations can pretend to be evidence-based or data-driven when they're not, right? So in the last 10 or 20 years, we're still at a transition phase where people were talking about, it started being big data, nobody uses that term now, then AI, machine learning, analytics, people science. But for that period of time, it was still okay to either admit that you're playing it by ear and following your intuition, or pretend that you're doing stuff with data. That's no longer the case, I think. So people science is already a fundamental tool within HR, and if HR can't adopt it, it will replace HR sooner rather than later. It will do HR better than HR has been doing itself. I also think that it is clear that if you consider the growing uncertainty and unpredictability of particularly hard skills, it's more important than ever to draw accurate insights on things that we should have always tried to understand, but now it's more important than ever to do so. For example, understanding human potential. How many HR professionals do you think have a strong understanding of the science and tools that are available to understand human potential? A minority today. But if most of the jobs of tomorrow or 20 years' time don't exist today, and we're going to have to be much better at understanding where people can be deployed or trained for, even when that means understanding their potential for things they have never done before, you need to use tools, science, and data to understand things like soft skills and really rely less on past performance and focus more on future performance, which is what potential is. This also applies to a world in which organizations have to manage more diverse teams and more diverse workforces. It's always a lot easier to manage people when they're all the same, when they have the same background, the same socio-demographic or even cognitive profile. It requires true leadership to manage a group of people who think differently and actually turn that difference into a plus, into a synergy. So dealing with or managing cognitive diversity is one of the key challenges of today, and it would only increase. So that's what it means for talent management. HR needs to truly be data-driven, evidence-based. I would even say go beyond the data and reach the level that science has. Science is data plus theory, not just lots of numbers, but an explanation, a testable and falsifiable theory that enables you to turn that data into insights. And then, of course, acting on those insights. People analytics can evolve a lot, but if there's a disconnection between the geeks in the basement and HR professionals or leaders playing it by ear and doing decisions intuitively, then we're wasting a big opportunity and nothing will change. So that's what it means for organizations and talent management. What does it actually mean for employees, for workers? Well, I think fundamentally, people will need to be understood even better than today. I think there is a fundamental crisis of understanding or misunderstanding in the world of work today. 100,000 years ago, talent was very simple. It was mostly about physical skills that could be easily observed, and most people hung out with the same 10 people all the time. So everybody had an accurate reputational model to understand, should I follow this person? Should we elect this person as a leader? Does this person have potential for something or not? Fast forward 100,000 years, and talent is very abstract. Even though I've been studying psychology for a long time, I could look at you for ages, and I can't possibly guess what you have talent for or what you have potential for. Talent involves things that are internal and that, even if Elon Musk succeeds at developing Neuralink, it will take some time to really understand what you're thinking and whether you have critical thinking, curiosity, learnability, or so forth. So the world is very complex. People today are already making a lot of career decisions, important career decisions, ill-informed, because their parents, aunt, cousin, boyfriend, girlfriend said, oh, why don't you study law? Or why don't you become a chief people analytics officer? We will get to that stage. It's not happening a lot yet, but we will get there. And then it's too late to change, and then people don't maximize the fit between their potential and the role that they are in, which is why, even though, objectively speaking, economic conditions are strong, we're still not unlocking human potential. So for that to happen, and this has huge implications for employees and speaks to the importance of using AI, technology, and people science in an ethical way to increase fairness and help people, people will need to be understood better by their organizations, by their prospective employers, by their recruiters. And we would also need to democratize this information, this feedback, so that people understand themselves better, so that people understand where their talents and skills could best be deployed. Especially because it's no longer going to be about what you studied at university or what school you went to. It's going to be more about your employability, your potential to develop the right skills that will make you employable in a role that you enjoy and want to maintain in the future. Soft skills like resilience, emotional intelligence, people skills in general, which will represent the last frontier for AI to automate. If we can make one reasonable or rational prediction about AI, is that it will never develop empathy. Machines and computers won't give a damn. And finally, what does all of this mean, or what does this may imply or mean for society? We talked about organizations, then employees or people. What about for society? Well, I think there are 3 reasons to expect society to become more meritocratic if we allow data, people science, and AI to play the role that it should play. So the ethical role that we hope it will play, and we're going to discuss this a little bit later in our panel discussion. 3 reasons. First of all, I think relying less on human intuition should increase fairness, right? Yes, we all like those stories about Microsoft, Uber, Google, or companies developing or accidentally developing sexist or racist algorithms, but they are sensationalist stories. Algorithms and AI cannot be racist or sexist. They don't have self-esteem issues that they need to protect by bringing other people or maybe humans down and feel better about themselves. Of course, if we train AI to predict biased outcomes, which are usually the reflection of human preferences, we will not just replicate human bias, but perfect it and augment it. The old saying in psychology and in social sciences always was garbage in, garbage out, right? And this happens to perfection with AI, which is basically cheaper, faster, more efficient prediction. Secondly, I think we will see the need to diversify the workforce even further, right? I was reading a very random historical essay a couple of weeks ago on the Irish Famine. What does that have to do with what we're talking about here? Very little, except that it mostly happened because the whole of Ireland only cultivated or only grew one type of potato. There was just one crop and one species of potato. And then one parasite came that infested that type of crop, and there was a famine. Isn't this a wonderful analogy for how organizations need to think about their workforce? If we hire on culture fit, if we hire people who are all the same, not just demographically, but also in terms of their cognitive diversity, how they think, feel, and act, it only takes one new challenge, one new environmental factor to turn a high-performing organization into bankruptcy, right? Which is why, if you also think about the innovator's dilemma or Schumpeter's idea of creative destruction, organizations often become a victim of their own success, because success breeds not just complacency, but replicating the formula that worked before. And the final reason, I think, is that as AI and data are used more comprehensively to truly understand human potential, we will need to rely less on hard skills, credentials, etc., which are much more conflated with socioeconomic status, social class, and some of the demographic factors that we're trying to tackle when we focus on demographic diversity. So imagine a world in which people are truly understood for their soft skills, their motivation, their ability and work ethic, what they can do in a specific role and for a specific organization. That, to me, looks like a meritocratic world. And it would only happen if we don't rely on humans to detect and vet these aspects of potential. So I think there are at least reasons to believe that there's a lot of good that could be done with technology, with data, and with AI. It always depends on the intentions and the motivations that organizations have. So I think we have time for questions. Thank you very much.
The floor. So whilst we're warming up, Al's walking around with the microphone, so if people have got questions, just put your hand up. I won't see you from here because of the lights. So,
and make sure you tell us if you're human, AI, or a hybrid, right?
Or a hybrid, it's very important. Or an incompetent male
chatbot, yes.
Incompetent male leader as well.
Yes, thank you.
Good question. So, Tomas, great stuff. And we've talked before, and I know you're going to expand a little bit on this in the panel. The theme of this conference is people, data for good. So where does that fit into the future that you've painted there?
Well, I think in a way, yeah, so I'm generally not an optimist, but in a way, because of that, I think it's so easy to improve over the status quo. Things are so bad right now that even if AI lives up to 20% of its possibilities or potential, it will improve things, right? So the analogy I often use is, self-driving cars don't have to be really accurate to kill fewer than 2 million people a year. But when one of them crashes, oh my God, we should never have self-driving cars out there. Let's keep human assassin drivers on the road. And in a way, it's the same with HR. I mean, go through any process, particularly process that involves diagnosis or working out what goes on. And I'm sorry, but even even ethical and good-hearted humans who undergo a lot of unconscious bias training are still going to make a lot of mistakes. And most importantly, when they make a mistake or when they get it right, it's very hard to understand why they got it right or why they made a mistake. You can't, we don't like black box algorithms, but you can unpack them. You can see how an algorithm is a recipe. What's the formula that the machine followed to make that decision, and how can we correct it or improve it? If you're hiring someone, I don't know if you made a mistake because you are sexist, you were hungover, or you had something to prove, A, B, or C.
So I think there's sensationalism on both sides, isn't there? There's wild claims made about what AI can do, and on the other side, there's as soon as there's one thing that potentially goes wrong, again, the press jump onto that as well.
Yes, and I think one distinction that is important to make is that let's talk about a little bit about leadership selection, and we're not going to focus on politics, but corporate or organizational leaders. Even the most enthusiastic AI aficionado, which is not me, would not suggest that to select or hire a CEO, you can just automate that process. and you would only give them an assessment, new generation, old generation, mine their CV, translate their YouTube clips using natural language processing into something, because even they should understand that if you have a well-designed, structured interview with experts who use data to enhance their judgment, humans and AI working together is the best combination. But that doesn't mean that we're currently affording that level of accuracy or detail or that expensive process for everyone. So if for the masses what we have is, did you go to the right school, did you go to the right university, or do you fit in this specific box that we have and it worked before, that's just not good enough. So that's where we should allow AI and technology to make some mistakes, because you're always going to make mistakes. People are not fish or squirrel. Data can help us predict human behavior, but it doesn't make humans more predictable. But allow mistakes. At least half of the mistakes we allow humans to indulge in.
Well, I think we should use AI at least partly to select some of our political leaders.
Well, or I mean, traditional clinical psychological assessments. What's wrong with that?
Yeah. Yes, question at the back there.
Yeah. Hi. I was just wondering, you mentioned really getting into measuring some of these soft skills. Curious about who's doing it well. How are they doing these things? I mean, it sounds really great, but tactically, how do we go about getting some of those things on a diverse set of employees across multiple countries?
Yeah, so look, I think we have had, in many areas of HR, and this is one of them, we have had science-based assessments, for example, to evaluate things like empathy, extroversion, agreeableness, intelligence, learning potential, curiosity, resilience, that have worked for a long time. And actually, there's independent, credible scientific evidence that helps you understand how they work, and you can falsify it. Mostly, then for each of these good tools, there's always been like 99 that are really bad, right? Or BuzzFeed-like quizzes of what breed of dog should you be, or what type of 17th century philosopher should you have been, or horoscopic kind of things like the MBTI, right? So which give the science a bad reputation. But even if you take the tools that have worked and which are validated, generally they suffered from lack of scaling potential, because either they were long, boring, tedious, or expensive, or very complex. That's what AI and machine learning algorithms and looking at new types of signals can give you. So not necessarily increase the accuracy of well-established methods that have worked. And by the way, you can easily assess these soft skills in a well-designed, structured interview with trained interviewers. It is just not the norm for that to happen. Mostly it's an informal chat by a biased manager who then evaluates your performance 6 months later. And guess what? They liked you in the beginning and they still like you 6 months later. Or they liked you in the beginning and they don't like you 6 months later, but they don't want to look like a fool, so they're going to pretend that you're an outstanding contributor. So old methods, we know that they work and that there is a science-driven methodology behind them, but they haven't been deployed at mass scale. And I think that's where technology really will play an even bigger role, because most of us have given away more data than we need to give away for someone to understand what we're like. Mostly that data is being used to show us supposedly relevant videos or bombard us with products or movie or music or boyfriend or girlfriend recommendations. But it could also be used to push people towards relevant jobs or roles. So there's a difference today between what we could know and what we should know about people, and that's why ethics are so important, and the ethics of AI is the most important area within people analytics. That was a tweetable kind of a remark.
It's on video.
Ian, yes, make sure, yes.
Thomas, hi, over here, Ian O'Keefe.
Okay. Oh, yes. Oh, hi.
Hi. Great talk, by the way. I love how you're thinking along about the way work is changing and how we have to think about workers in a much different way going forward. Frida Pola and I were actually just talking about that combined with what just came out recently from the Business Roundtable about corporations needing to, exist for reasons other than shareholder value alone. Do you see like a new kind of conversation emerging with heads of companies in terms of the way that they're incented, the way that they think about short-term gains versus the longer-term sort of outlook, both from a growth perspective and from a human perspective?
Yes, and I think that conversation is happening already, right? So obviously some people are slightly more skeptical, and they point out that it's not the first time that it happens, So every time inequality goes up, capitalism gets a worse reputation, business leaders come out and want to improve their reputation collectively, but sometimes good change can start by being impression management or even virtue signaling, and then it leads to actual behavior. So it doesn't matter why it happens, right? I think what's at stake here is, and it's not either or, but where do we want to be on this continuum between short-term and long-term profits? Because it's also profits in the long term. So are we prioritizing what happens tomorrow or next week? That's never been good for innovation. That's also never been good for culture. And that's never been good for giving people. This is the fundamental change. I said the age of the spiritual workaholic, but I really mean it. For the people who form the 400 or 500 million people who are part of the knowledge economy, it's no longer enough to give them a job with flexible hours, well-paid, prestigious, sushi chef, table tennis, scooters, and massage. It has to be meaningful. It has to be meaningful because humans are meaning-craving machines, and there is no meaning, right? So we have to make it up. Leaders come and provide us with meaning. It used to be religion, but the world is becoming less and less religion in general, particularly the rich world. Before that, it was philosophy, but nobody reads philosophy anymore. Before that, it was shamanism. We have science still, but that's being discredited. So a meaningful career that makes you feel like your life has a sense of purpose is critical. Have you ever walked? Do we have anybody from Lululemon here? Is anyone a fan of Lululemon or buys their products? Have you walked into a Lululemon shop or Peloton bikes? Like, people are possessed. It's cult-like identification. And that is the best way to drive high engagement and get people to stay and work very hard. Before, and according to the old short-term view of, okay, let's, people are like the Homo economicus, rational entities that just maximize profit and minimize losses, so they will only respond. It's not like that. We are spiritual workaholics. And that can lead to burnout as well, right? And also, how many companies can offer that strong sense of meaning and purpose? Well, not all of them, but all of them are trying. And if you succeed, you're going to compete very effectively in the war for talent.